And that was how to make the elixir of life and holy grail. Next up,
I'm Immortal, your source for all things immortal.
I'm Ilia Stambler, PhD. I live in Israel. My main occupation is Chief Science Officer of an association called VETEC, the Movement for Longevity and Quality of Life, here in Israel, but I also do research, the multidisciplinary research of aging, mostly aging and life extension. But I'm not a full-time researcher. I'm also an activist, a public advocate for longevity research, not just in my association VETEC, but also in some other associations, also international, like International Longevity Alliance, International Society on Aging and Disease. I wrote two books. One is called Longevity Promotion, Multidisciplinary Perspectives, and another is History of Life Extensionism. So that's basically me.
wow, so you have a very holistic understanding of the entire longevity field, it seems, right?
Yes, yes, that's my approach. I don't believe in a very narrow specialization, especially in aging. Aging is such an encompassing phenomenon that you just have to be multidisciplinary to tackle them from different things.
Well, I'm so glad we have you here today. I know it's a little bit difficult with the time difference between Israel and Canada, but we're super happy to have you here. Before we go more into the questions around your work, we want to ask a question that we always ask at the beginning of our podcast, which is about the concept of immortality, right? So if I were to ask you, Ilya, what does the word immortal or immortality mean to you?
Well, that's a question I often have to address in various interviews, and I always say the same, that actual immortality is an impossibility, a logical impossibility. You cannot say I've lived forever, as you cannot say I've counted to infinity. But what is possible is so-called biological immortality or potential immortality, meaning that there is no limit to lifespan. It is true for life generally, which doesn't have any predetermined limit on its development. It is true for individual organisms. So I do believe in it, and that's why I also believe in the possibility of life extension. I realize that our current technological capabilities are limited to enable actual life extension, perhaps even in our lifetime, but generally it is a theoretical possibility to extend the life even indefinitely.
So if I were to ask you whether you'd want to have an extended life indefinitely without, the complications of aging, I guess infinite health span, you would be for it, right?
Once again, not infinite, it's a logical impossibility, but to strive forever, strive as much as possible to extend my life for one day and then another day. Yes, I would definitely want to live as long as possible by technological possibilities and also by moral development.
Oh, okay, sorry, understood.
Perfect. Before we dig into a little bit more about your knowledge with, I guess, the history of life extension, we wanted to ask what inspired you to, I guess, start looking at aging and longevity? How did you get involved? Especially because your background, I believe, was initially in literature, if I'm right?
Yes, yes. I'm also often asked this question, and I always wonder why other people aren't involved, not interested in this, because it's such a basic question of human nature to be interested in one's
Yeah.
mortality, in one's aging. Actually, they are a little bit abnormal for not taking an interest in this. But for me personally, I was interested in this from an early age, probably from the age of 6, when I realized that I'm probably very likely going to die. I thought, is there something that could be done? I've maintained this interest ever since. And for quite a lot of time, there wasn't any way to express this interest or get involved. But now there are more and more possibilities. And even in English literature, yes, I have an MA in English literature. I also have a previous background in biomedical engineering in here in Israel and Technion, and also in Russia. But even when studying literature, I always was interested in this topic. MA topic was heroic death, heroism and heroic death in English and Russian literature. So I argue that death is nothing good. You know, people talk about a heroic death. I don't believe any death is good. So if you don't believe death is good, you have to strive for life extension, for prevention of death. So it all ties together. I've always been interested in this. No no verving from this topic, but I did approach it from different angles. Now my angle is more activism as well as multidisciplinary research.
So given that you're involved in activism, and I know you have a whole book about the history of life extension, I want to ask, because nowadays I feel like there's still some opposition to, like, if I told somebody, hey, I'm a life extensionist, they'll tell me, yeah, it's a little bit weird, right? Or that's, I'm not so sure about you. So I'm wondering, is there more opposition now than at any other point in history, or is there more acceptance now than at any other point?
I would say there are more acceptance. I would divide this debate into four subpopulations of people. One subpopulation simply ignores the subject, so it's the main source of opposition. You cannot do anything if people are not interested, that just don't wish to talk with you. The second category of opposition is just people who want to oppose you, who just want to cancel this research. And on the other side, there are people who are interested, in the level of getting an article here and there on Facebook, and there are people who really get involved in activism and research, like I hope I do. So I would say that the former two categories are diminishing. There are much less people who are completely disinterested, much less people who openly oppose it, and much more people who are interested and who are actively involved in the field. So I would say that the balance is shifting to the direction of more involvement. I have two explanations for this. One is our population is aging. There's just no way around it. People talked about population aging for decades, but now we really see this happening. So, and the more people see this happening, the more they get interested in this topic. And second, the technologies are evolving, are developing, no matter what you do. So it's kind of a stick and a carrot, where people see the possibilities as well, driven from the potential problems and challenges. So from these two forces, I think the involvement in the life extension field will only grow.
Mhm. I completely understand the logic with, I guess, older people wanting to learn more about their aging and longevity. But I want to be a little bit careful wording this question. But through history, is there some type of correlation between a person's position or culture in the world and how they're opposed with life extension technology?
You would be surprised, but in my work, I found that the younger people are more interested in this because they're also more open-minded, and they also believe in the future. They're more active generally. All the people generally interested in their health, but they usually don't express far-reaching hopes, and that could even be a problem. But young people, especially, with progressively driven people, are very interested usually. But otherwise, I don't see any segmentation of the population. You can find life extension is among religious, among atheists, among all walks of life, actually. I think it's kind of a basic philosophy that's not related to your occupation or other beliefs. It's something that you either in the ignoring camp or you're interested camp. So there's a crossover between the camps.
Right. I mean, if you're not interested in your life or your death, I have some questions for you. So that's pretty interesting. But regarding, because you mentioned how nowadays we have a better understanding of aging, right? So my question is, at what point did we actually truly understand aging, right? Like we had developed a framework for it. Like nowadays, everyone's talking about the damage repair paradigm, the hallmarks of aging. But when did we first develop that framework? And before then, what did we really think of aging as a whole?
Right. First of all, we don't understand aging. Let us be clear about it. We don't understand aging. We don't have a theory of aging, like in the usual sense of a theory, something that can describe the system, that can predict the behavior of the system. We don't have anything of this kind. We have about 300, they say, maybe more various approaches, because everything changes with age. So you can explain aging from every angle possible, from every process possible that takes place in the body, also in the environment. So we don't really understand aging, but I would say that the first truly scientific theory of aging based on biological observations was done about 120 years ago by Elie Mechnikov, a Russian-French biologist, actually a Nobel laureate, who I believe formulated the first truly scientific theory of aging in the modern sense. But there are, of course, theories of aging before, like vitalistic theories that we're losing some vital force. Also, the humoristic theories, like the impairment of balance between elements. All we had all this in alchemy. We had all this in traditional medicine, and traditional Indian medicine, Chinese medicine. They all had different explanations for aging and age-related diseases. But I would say the modern period in gerontology started with Mechnikov about 120 years ago. In 1903, he formulated the concept of gerontology, the scientific study of aging. So in this 120 years is what we have in terms of scientific development, and there is very long way to go, I believe. On the one hand, it's a little bit pessimistic, 120 years we still don't have a cure. But on the other hand, it's optimistic. You just think it's just only 120 years that we consider it scientifically. You can imagine what can happen in the next 120 years. And I must bring the example of aviation. Wright brothers also did their first flight in 1903, and look where we are now in terms of aviation. And if we invested even a small percentage of resources into gerontology, into life extension, I believe we could achieve much greater results.
Hmm. So, how exactly do you think the perception of life extension has changed over time? I'm sure at some point, if you said, "Oh yeah, I want to live forever," people would look at you like you're either very optimistic or a little bit crazy. So, how has the perception changed over time?
Well, you don't say I want to live forever, never. Once again, you can say I want to extend my life, and that's perfectly fine. And I don't divide people into radical life extension and practical life extensions. If you're a little bit aware of the field, you understand that right now we are probably not going to make it in terms of life extension with the current technologies. But it does mean that radical life extension is not possible in principle with new emerging technologies. So we have to be realistic on the one side and optimistic on the other, and work for the development of the field. How did it change? Generally, I believe it changed. The perception of aging changed with the existing general scientific paradigms and with the existing technologies. For example, in the 1950s, when the paradigm of molecular biology emerged, suddenly the entire aging field moved into the direction of molecular biology as well as cybernetics. Also in the 50s, the entire field started to talk in terms of computation, in terms of prediction. And before that, there were more discussion in terms of even physics, of physiology. So it did change in terms of the scientific paradigm. And also, aging research is a very integral part of the entire scientific milieu, of the entire scientific field. You cannot deal with aging without treating all the other subjects, the entire human biology, the entire environment. So, and I think that's also a source of the strength of the field, a source of development when we involve additional fields, when we cross inseminate between the fields, when we create synergies. That's, I believe, how the whole topic of life extension will advance.
So I also want to ask then, because I know the ways people have tried to achieve life extension nowadays, we have a very scientific approach. I mean, people do focus on the holistic things as well, like exercise and diet. But I know that wasn't always the case in history. I remember reading part of your book, and there was things like testicular grafting as well. Very interesting theories on how hormones could be involved. And I think you talked about France and Germany and the Soviet Union, how the changes have happened. So I was curious, could you share with our listeners how some of the ways of achieving life extension have changed from, a very holistic approach to the sort of very scientific approach we have now?
Well, I think the correct dichotomy would be not between holistic and scientific, but between holistic and
Oh,
reductionist.
sorry. Yes, that's
So
correct.
the two ways to look at phenomena, either as a whole or as a mechanism, as a system composed of part. Sometimes you don't see the forest for the trees, but sometimes you also don't see the trees for the forests. So it's two basic modes of human cognition that we usually share, perhaps through time sharing. Sometimes we're holists, sometimes we're reductionists. Sometimes we see the trees, sometimes we see the forest, and somehow we manage in the world. But in aging research, often people are stuck in certain resolution. You're either a holist or reductionist. You either see the small parts or you see the whole picture. And I hope there will be also more crosstalk between these two approaches to create a more balanced, more synergistic way forward. But in terms of time sharing, yes, there were periods when there are more emphasis on a holistic approach or a reductionist approach. I believe it had to do with disappointment. Sometimes the reductionism promised a lot without delivering. It promised to understand the entire mechanism of the human body and just fix a few things. And then it was humbled by the complexity of the process. And then the interest shifted in the direction of holism. But then you see that holism, okay, you can talk about the whole, but what do you actually mean? What is this whole? And where people exercised and did well for thousands of years, and they still live about the same. So it's probably not a very um, impactful approach in terms of radical change. And then there was a shift back to holism. But I believe in an imbalance. We do need some kind of combination of holistic holistic perception and mechanistic understanding. So I think that's the way forward.
Hmm. So shifting gears a little bit, I'm sure anyone in the audience listening right now would be able to agree with the fact that currently in today's day and age there is a huge emphasis on the point that you are what you eat. Eating is very important and it can affect how you feel, how long you live. Ideas alongside that. So when did this idea of, I guess, restricting your diet or controlling your diet being recognized as having a role in how long you live and longevity in general?
Yes, just in about a couple of weeks, they're going to be published a new book by Springer on nutrition and longevity, where I have a chapter on longevity, foods and myth, legend, and history, basically addressing this question. So the main point I argue is that once again, you cannot look at longevity foods as a simple list of ingredients, something you mix together, put in your body, and you will live long. You actually have to consider the entire environment, and also the morality and the intellectual beliefs, the humanistic beliefs. So a part of it was always a concept of moderation. If you look at history, you see that the concept of moderation was always a part of longevity regimens, as part of general morality. So I would say forever, at least for a few thousand years, we have records. People argued for moderation in food as a way toward longevity. And in more scientific terms, it was formulated at the beginning of the 20th century, and not by Clive Mackay, as many people think, who first proposed the concept of calorie restriction, but earlier by Lafayette Mendel and others. But once again, it's a very entrenched idea that you have to be moderate in nutrition to achieve longevity. And I think that's one of the few proven prescriptions that we still have. You don't have to starve yourself, of course not, but you have to be moderate.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that's something we're encouraging now because I know at some point in history, alchemy and eating mercury was something. So I'm glad we're part of, we skipped that part of history now. We're something a little bit more scientific and realistic. But I wanted to ask, because you're an activist and you're probably one of the more outspoken people in the space. I know there's a lot of people talking about this, but you've put a lot of books out there. You're part of a lot of organizations doing a lot. And I want to ask, in terms of who you're trying to get to listen, because that's your role as an activist, right? You want people to make change for the actual to be real actionable things happening. But when you're doing this sort of activist work, who do you want to listen, and what exactly do you want them to change?
Right. First of all, I want people to take an interest, and as a result of interest, I want them to take action. The camp of ignoring, the camp of opposing is still too large for a change to happen. It's no comparison to what was 20 years ago. I started this activism about 20 years ago with the first site we created on life extension. And in these 20 years, there's a really tidal change of attitudes in favor of acceptance. But still not enough to really invest large intellectual and material resources into the field. So that's our goal as activists to get people involved. Like any social movement, we need more people. We need more people involved. We need more people interacting. And at all the levels. I wouldn't say that we only need decision makers, but we need everybody. We need researchers. We need public figures, or we need everybody basically, because even decision makers, if you don't see massive interest, they don't take notice. They go to topics where do see the public interest. That's just how they work. So if we want to dedicate a large proportion of effort, of resources to the goal of health longevity for all, we need to convince people that it's actually worth while goal that people should strive for. Same as for the green movement, same for any movement for the rights of certain categories of people. When people understand that this is an important goal for society, they should get organized and do activism.
Mm. So, one common policy change we've heard is to increase funding for research on the aging process. However, governments only, as we all know, governments only have a limited amount of funding available to them. And to add things, you need to take away from something else. So, if it were up to you, where would you take the money away from? And would you give it back to aging related research?
Right. So let's start with the fact that the governments allocate money not so much by careful calculation of public needs, but very, very strongly by lobbying, by special interests, who has the loudest mouth of all, who has the largest wallet of all. So that's how they distribute the interest. So that's our goal as activists to make the public realize that this is a very important topic, and then the priorities will shift automatically. Then we'll see where to take, because that's actually the goal for the entire public. And right now, the distribution of funding is simply ridiculous. I can say for Israel, out of a few $billion governmental research funding, aging research gets about zero. There were a few years when, when thanks to our advocacy, there were a few millions. Now it's zero, so it's completely disproportionate compared to the importance of the subject. So at least we would want to make the allocation a little bit more reasonable, considering that aging is the main challenge of public health and of the entire society. And then we can see where to take, maybe the military, maybe some other departments. But another solution, even more practical, is to understand that the aging is actually a part of the agenda of many relevant frameworks. For example, if there are governmental funding for research in medicine, aging should be a necessary part of it. So if you issue a call for research proposals, aging should be there. So you don't actually have to take from any such agency. You actually just incorporate aging into the call, into the agenda, and that way everybody win. Even in the military, right now they're even starting some programs to test anti-aging. So they understand it's also important for the military. So it's not so much taking from somebody as incorporating it into the relevant agendas as a necessary element, as a relevant element.
So I understand that. Yeah, I think it's important that we have to have the government involved in sort of making these decisions. But there's also the issue that I thought of, which was, I mean, at the end of the day, money is a motivating factor for a lot of people, right? And especially the pharmaceutical companies, which ultimately, we need them to have some sort of therapy for life extension. They often, I mean, there's no aging like pill right now that they can all go by, like, oh, you have a 10-year pipeline from concept to out on the market. And I don't know, I was thinking of, in terms of profit, it seems a lot better to continuously treat rather than to focus on health. So I understand, yes, there has to be maybe some mindset change here, but do you have any ideas in terms of how we can actually incentivize these pharmaceutical companies, or maybe even other organizations, to start funding and to be looking into more aging related research?
Great question. Yes, right now pharma is often disincentivized to go into prevention. Just simply from talking to them, they understand that they much prefer a blockbuster pill. When you're about to die, they can just give it to you. And also, prevention is much less patentable. It's probably also much cheaper. So a lot of lack of incentives, but we shouldn't place all our bets, all our hopes on pharma. First of all, what we advocate, first of all, is more public spending on basic research, because that's the basis. As you said, I wish we all had a pill that we could buy right now. Then we'd be all standing in line to the to the pharmacy. Um, but right, we don't have such a pill or even a combined treatment, so we need basic research. We need to understand aging well enough to be able to develop a comprehensive therapy, and for that we only need probably public funding. Publicly funded research, and that's also important because it gives people entitlement to the results. If the research is funded from public money, the public also has the entitlement to the results. So once again, you don't give the entire rule to pharma. But yes, pharma has a place of its own. It's good in distributing, probably not so good in basic research. That's the role of the publicly funded agencies, but in terms of distribution, in terms of advertising, they may be important, and there could be ways to incentivize them as well. Um, I'm not sure exactly how. In my book, I even suggested taxing those who don't develop aging therapies, and giving tax benefits to those who do develop. That could be one way to consider. But generally, I think that the main way to incentivize also pharma is by us. If we really create a public movement for anti-aging, for preventive therapy, then they'll have no choice but to develop those treatments. Because they also understand that it could be a huge niche for the market. They just prefer to be doing whatever they're doing out of inertia. But if they understand that there's no way, people want prevention, people are interested in this kind of approach, they'll have no choice but to develop this as well. Right now, they begin to understand this. Right now, there is what they call longevity industry, who is beginning to think in these terms. But still, it's a very tiny segment as far as we can see. And also there is sometimes excessive commercialization leads to some cutting of some corners. So once again, I wouldn't place all the bets on pharma, on the commercial approaches, but some kind of synergy of various segments of society.
So when people, I guess a lot of people like to describe aging as a disease, even though it's not necessarily, you can't diagnose aging if you were to go to the doctor. If you go to the doctor and say, hey, I have gray hairs, the doctor wouldn't come to you and say, yes, you have a disease of aging. Instead, they just say you're getting older. So is it helpful to be calling aging a disease, or does it have drawbacks?
Well, at least in my works, I don't advocate for calling aging a disease specifically. I advocate for calling aging a medical condition, which can be a disease, a syndrome, an underlying cause, a risk factor, anything you can address medically. And that I think is important to recognize aging as something that can be addressed medically, also for prevention. Because right now it's not even there. You know, you talk with physicians, with biologists, aging is not in the textbook. You know, it's something that's completely irrelevant for many professionals. So at least we need to put it on the books as something that can be addressed. Something can be treated, and whatever call you call it is less significant. And the next stage is really after we recognize that aging is a thing that can be addressed medically, that we need to tackle. The next stage will be really to diagnose it. Right now, we can call you know, it a disease or a risk factor or anything. But if I cannot measure it, if I cannot predict its behavior, just spinning slogans. So the next stage after recognizing it's a problem, we need to quantify it, to create some kind of standards, or some kind of metrics to be able to actually tackle it medically. So it's a two-stage process.
Yeah, and I mean, I know something else about that you've strongly advocated for, aside from the idea of whether aging is a disease or not, is the inclusion of older adults within these research studies. Since I think, I mean, you mentioned I think in one of the papers that right now, I mean, we take into account kids, we take into account women, right, the gender differences, but not really age differences. So I was wondering, do you think older adults should be included in studies that focus on just age-related diseases or diseases as a whole? And the second part is, if we do include them in more studies, do you imagine including only quote unquote healthy older adults or just older adults in general, whether they have some comorbidity or not?
Okay, also great question. First of all, why do I advocate for the inclusion of aging into the general research agendas? People say, okay, the people do medical research. Why do we need to put aging there? For a few basic reasons. One is when you consider aging, you have to consider the development in long term. Uh, and other reason is you have to consider the entire human system, not just a particular symptom, but the entire system, the so-called multimorbidity, because all the people, they are characterized by multiple diseases at once, which is not cannot isolate one from another, and that's why many drugs are simply not effective in them. The drugs that were tested on younger people, when you give them to older people, they're just simply not going to work, because they have various complexities and multimorbidities that all the people have. That's why we need to consider all the people, especially when we develop drugs that will be given to them. It's not done. It's sometimes it's done, but generally it's very seldom done for various reasons. It is easier to see an effect in younger population, even to publish a paper or to have proof. When you go to older population, you get all kinds of confounding factors that you don't know how to extricate, and so it's not done in all the people. But if we really want effective treatments for all the people, we need to do research in all the people. So and if they are not, if we don't force them, pharma will not do it. So we do need to mandate including all the people. Actually, it is already in the mandate. It's already in the international harmonization requirements for drug development to include all the people in drug trials, but it's not done for the reasons I just mentioned. But we just simply need more enforcement. We simply need to mandate it clear that at least for those treatments that will go to all the people have to be included. And it goes to vaccines as well. By the way, vaccines are also mainly tested on younger population and then given to everybody. So yeah, it's a very major point of advocacy, major point of policy that we need to promote. And the other questions: do we need only the sick people? Do we need the healthy people? I would say we need everybody, simply for comparison. Sometimes what they do is they compare young and healthy people with old diseased people, and then they get a wonderful effect with a p 0.0000. But if actually compared old people, old diseased people, old healthy people, you may have a much more salient effects. But it needs to be done. So we need all kinds of populations, but definitely to include all the people, and definitely to look at the effects at the longer term. You don't just exhaust the research in cross-sectional analysis, but also need to see longitudinally how the things develop.
So, fortunately, here at I'm Immortal, Ilia, we've been able to speak to a lot of people and gather their opinions on what they think will happen or their worries with how society would change when age related diseases no longer exist or we're able to die from things other than just aging. So, some of the things they've come up with are social stagnation, increased basic education, aka university becoming the new basic education level. So, what do you think in terms of what kind of socio-economic problems we might experience or what might be exacerbated aside from a loss in quality of life? And are these problems big enough that we should just ditch the idea of longevity and living longer?
Of course not. First of all, those people should read my books, especially the article frequently asked question on health span and lifespan extension. All those questions are really standard. You know, you think a few minutes about the topic, you immediately come up with all those arguments about overpopulation and boredom and stagnation and everything. That's how the human mind works. It's used to certain time frame, and if you can imagine another frame, you immediately start imagining problems. Some say it's a part of rationalizations. You know, the sour grapes syndrome. You remember in the fable, when the fox couldn't reach the grapes, he started saying that those grapes are sour. So it's a part of that. Some people are not aware that that is even possible. So that's a part of the rationalization. If you don't think something is possible, that's probably also undesirable. But all those arguments exist, and they can all be addressed. Regarding stagnation, actually, we could argue that you need a longer and healthier lifespan to be able to learn something. Right now, people just die in their infancy without being able to learn anything. And if you're talking about freeing space for the young, well, that could be a concern, especially in academic frameworks. But we need to understand that we don't have to kill and eat our professors to to allow our young to develop. We need to think of some kind of creative framework where also the young talent can find its place. And for the young themselves, you know, once again, you don't have to wait for the old people to die. You can just develop something for yourself, and if you develop it, it's yours. Nobody can take it from you. So I don't believe in this kind of strife. Actually, we do speak about intergenerational solidarity as a solution to the aging challenge. You know, we don't kill our grandparents and parents. We live together. We love each other. So I wouldn't speak a bit in terms of strife, but in terms of cooperation, of solidarity. And in terms of resources, once again, we shouldn't think of our resources as finite. We learn to expand our resource base very considerably, from a few million people who lived a few hundred years ago to billions now, and we still have something to eat. So I basically don't believe in any limit on resources. That's because of which we need to kill the old people. Because when you say why are they occupying space, you should say let's kill them. It's the same. Or let them die. I don't subscribe to this view. I think we can find ways around it.
Okay, well, thank you for some of the encouraging words, Ilia, about our future, because let me tell you, I don't want to be part of a dystopian nightmare. Hopefully, we're doing the right thing if we're encouraging life extension. But let's focus on the present right now, which is, there's not, like I said, we talked about, there's no magic pill, but there is an industry, aside from the longevity industry, called the age tech industry, who care about, the needs and wants of older adults, whether that be mobility, independence, loneliness, all these different things. I was wondering, this is sort of a two-part question, but how long do you think this industry will exist? And that ties to when do you think by 2050 or 2060, how far you think we'll progress in terms of the longevity space, in terms of, some sort of therapy?
Age tech definitely has its place. We have to understand both the biomedical intervention, the preventive intervention, and the age tech intervention have as the goal helping the older people. The distinction is that age tech wants to help older people when they're already frail. By the very definition of assistive technology, you have to assist them; they cannot function. And biomedical intervention, the longevity intervention, want to prevent them from going to this state. So basically, our goal is to put age tech out of business as soon as possible. But we understand that right now, when we don't have any comprehensive treatment or effective treatment or proven treatment, that there is this a place for age tech. So it should be allowed. But once again, we should not cancel each other. We shouldn't see each other as competition. They have a place now. Maybe later they will be removed, or longevity therapies will be unsuccessful and they will remain and will die out. But right now we have to give space for everybody, for every approach. For example, in the call for research proposals that I helped to formulate a few years ago in Israel, they had three parts for aging research: one biomedical, one technological, and one social. So we need to give space to every approach, because once again, you don't put all the eggs in one basket. We see which one can help, but we definitely need space for biomedicine, for preventive anti-aging, and hopefully we'll put aging tech out of business.
I feel like you've built the perfect transition for me to ask my next question by speaking about Israel. For the audience listening, if you're not aware, Marvin and I were both based in Toronto, Canada, and Ilia is located in Israel. So we want to ask you, Ilia, in Israel currently, what advocacy and policy actions do you focus on promoting within Israel or even internationally?
Yes, thank you. All those topics we discussed are basically on the agenda that we promote. We have quite an active organization here in Israel, VETEC, the Movement for Longevity and Quality of Life, which is as a scientific advisory board, basically with representatives from all the universities in Israel, and we organize discussions in Knesset. We actually put the topic of health and longevity research, development, and education into the Israel Master Plan on Aging that was published by Knesset. We helped to formulate a few calls for research proposals, because I think it's a very strong tool to encourage the field, the call for research proposals. We actually don't argue, we don't advocate for any of our projects. We're real advocacy organizations. We want open tenders. We want open competition. And we ourselves didn't get one penny from those calls. So our program consists of three parts: increasing funding for aging research in the relevant frameworks, increasing education on aging, generally, not just in academia, but in all walks of life. And the third is developing biomarkers of aging developing predictive metrics for aging-related ill health as a way to encourage testing, to encourage research and intervention. So these are the 3 points, and we're doing our best. We have very little funding, but at least we achieved something, and I hope that we continue our advocacy. And now we have a government. Finally, after 4 elections, I hope we can do, and also internationally, we have similar agendas. I contribute, for example, in the International Longevity Alliance. So we have about 30 NGOs, 30 non-profit associations, or longevity associations from 25 countries. So hopefully soon there'll be one from Canada as well. And they all have very similar agendas. Like we have in Israel, in every country, they do lack public funding, they do lack education, and they do lack metrics for aging. And I hope we can develop it also internationally. So that's my main focus. I may not be so productive in terms of research, but less in terms of activism, we can make some difference.
Well, it's great that Israel's so involved. Like, I know a lot of the countries, I mean, maybe it's just based on who Sufan and I interview, but we interview a lot of people from Canada, from the US, from the UK. But it's great, yeah, Israel's involved. I mean, even reading, I think, in Dmitry Kaminsky's book, one of his longevity industry books, he had a chapter, I think, or written about Israel, deep knowledge ventures in general. They pointed out Singapore and Israel as some places to look out for in the future. So that's great to hear that you get involved. I did want to ask, and this is sort of an off tangent question, but I'm sort of wading into the waters of transhumanism here, and it's just because I'm not aware of what Israel's like. I'm familiar with the Canadian climate. If I go on the street and I tell someone, "Oh yeah, are you transhumanist or not?" I can kind of expect what answer to get. But in terms of Israel, is it okay? I don't know if you're transhumanist, Ilia, first of all, but is it okay to be openly transhumanist in Israel? Like, is it looked down upon? Is it looked up to? Is there any sort of, I don't know, perception of what it really means to seek super longevity, super intelligence, and these sort of concepts?
All right. So first of all, yes, I do identify as a transhumanist sometimes, not always. It depends on the audience. And why did I identify as a transhumanist? Because when I started to get involved early in the century, about in 2002, there wasn't a longevist movement as such that you say, okay, this is life extensionist movement, longevist. When you were interested in life extension, you had to get with the transhumanist, because that was a part of the overall transhumanist ideology. That's why I think many people identified with this ideology. Here in Israel, I didn't have any repercussions, any drawbacks by identifying with as a transhumanist. Actually, it actually helped me to get a few publications in the press, because people were curious. But I would say it's not very relevant whether I call myself or not. Here in Israel, at least, there's no danger, but also no benefit from it. You understand? I say transhumanist. Okay, so we need to speak more in terms of policy, in terms of actual research. So all those the titles, all those labels are less relevant. Right now, I prefer to identify as a longevist or life extensionist, because that's my belief. If you take transhumanism as a whole, considering all the human enhancement they speak about, I'm interested in life extension. I may be super smart, but if I'm dead, there's no much use. So I focus on life extension. I think it's the main point of advancement. But other things will get together with it. Also, being smart. It's difficult to extend your life if you are stupid. So, but those are secondary. The main goal is surviving, continue to survive.
So once again, I just want to emphasize that me and Marvin were very unfamiliar with the culture and religious influences in Israel. But speaking on that topic, is there anything cultural or religious that influences how people in Israel perceive or accept life extension?
Once again, in my book, I have the chapter on longevity and the Jewish tradition, and actually you can find a lot of support in the Jewish tradition for the ideas of life extension, even of biotechnology generally. And Judaism is a little permissive when it comes to saving human life. So I would say permissive, encouraging. When it comes to human life, it's the main value. All the other considerations are put aside. So in this way, Israel may be a fertile ground. But once again, the in every religion, I believe that there are undercurrents in favor of life extension and against it. Also, in Judaism, you can find rabbis who say that now life is limited, 120 years. And the same undercurrents you can find in Christianity, in Islam, in atheism. Even some atheists believe that it's okay to be eaten by worms at a certain time. It's just the way nature works. Others think that this is our world and we have to continue. So their life extension is both among atheists and among religious. But I would say that there are no special obstacles to the development of life extension in Israel. Actually, it's a very technological-minded culture. It's a very scientifically minded culture, also education-minded culture. But once again, the inertia is still very strong. Also in Israel, I wouldn't say it's a paradise for life extension. The inertia is still strong. Still very little resources are dedicated to it. You see, out of the entire research budget, virtually zero is dedicated to aging per se. In though university work on this from different university grants and international aid, international funds. So work is done here, but it's never enough. Until we really have verifiable healthy life extension, nothing is enough. So I do hope this field develops also here in Israel and everywhere.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, like we are not informed on Israel, so we're very happy to have, international collaboration with all these other countries. It's awesome, really.
It,
And I just have, sorry.
I just have to say, you said international collaboration. It's a very big booster for the field. Simple international collaboration. For example, we initiated. I just have to interject it. It's very important.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
We initiated a program called Barracks Aging, written Israel Research and Academic Research on Aging. I had the honor to write the first draft of this call for research proposals with an emphasis on prevention and multimorbidity and neuroscience. And 200 labs submitted proposals, 100 from the UK, 100 from Israel. 14 labs got funding. Simply by collaboration, you improve the quality of your work. Not just the scope, even the quality of your work. You publish in higher impact journals simply by collaboration. So I think if we encourage collaboration between countries, I think it will be a very strong leverage for the field. Yes.
Okay. Well, why don't I ask another thing then? Because I know when I first emailed you, I was aware of your mathematics involvement in mathematics actually before your advocacy, which is interesting because I know you're way more involved as an activist. But I do know you're involved in something called the Quantified Longevity Guide, if that's correct. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we're once again, I don't think I've heard that many people involved in it. And maybe it's more of an Israel thing. I don't know if it's something that maybe I'm just not aware of. But do you mind describing it to our audience?
Yes, thanks. That's our collaboration with Dr. David Bloch. So when we speak about this project, it's always me and Dr. David Bloch. He's the mathematician. I'm more involved in the biological part and the interpretation part. Yes, we advanced. As I said from the start, a major step in the development of the field, I believe, is quantification. Quantification of aging, prediction of age-related disease, quantifying the effects of intervention, because you can wave your hands all you want and call it a disease and take all kinds of pills, but unless you can measure it, what you have now and what you have after intervention, there is no way to advance. And we try to contribute. I don't say we solve the problem, but we try to contribute. We develop some information theory based metrics, based on normalized mutual information and entropy. And we started this commitment at the European Commission to advance this topic because it wasn't there. There were various kinds of frailty evaluation, but just to dig deeper to try to evaluate multimorbidity and predict aging health. It was there. I would say it played much of an impact. It had much of an impact, but we do our part. I hope there will be many initiatives like that, so they can all combine synergistically. There are other people doing similar work, also using what they call artificial intelligence or machine learning, basically with the same rationale to predict age-related disease and to measure interventions. But we do our part. We don't use machine learning. We actually use very simple algorithms. It's just the just some decision tree models, but it's still important in some way.
Mhm. So I want to shift the conversation once again a little bit into this idea of biomarkers. We've spoken to many people on what they think biomarkers should be, what biomarkers are, so many different things relating to them. So do you think we should be looking for biomarkers that that match with chronological age or with age-related declines?
I think we need both. I think we need both. There is the ground to say that we can see some kind of norm by averaging, let's say, a certain aging at certain ages, but there are also an approach to predict specific disease or multimorbidity. And I would even name a third approach, which is not even discussed very often, is the longitudinal approach to make those biomarkers self-referential, to see how your own homeostasis works, or homodynamics works, to see if if you're in a disarray. Just to look at every organism as a self-sufficient system. And for that, once again, you need models of aging, you need theory of aging. We're not there. But I would say all this research needs to be encouraged very strongly. People often focus on therapies. They want to have the pill, but there's no pill and no treatment without diagnosis, without measuring the effects.
Well, if we're also talking about models, then, because I know right now the animal testing is it's the progress is not really substantial. It's not what we're really hoping for. And one, I think you proposed as well, but a few other people have proposed this idea of in silico testing. I was wondering how it would exactly work, right? Because longevity is something that seems to be sort of temporal in nature, where you can't really see its effects unless you observe it over time. So for in silico, what exactly do you have in mind, and do you think it could replace animal testing as sort of a standard?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that any in silico or any modeling needs to be based on data. So our main problem is not even the algorithm, not even the computational platform. It's the data, and data can be collected longitudinally, temporal, as you say, and then we'll build longitudinal models. Or cross-sectionally, and then we build comparative models. But we need data, and data is still insufficient, and there is problems in the quality of data. So that's the main step that prevents the wide application with many of such so-called artificial intelligence or machine learning models are irreproducible simply because they use a very specific set of data, and if you apply it on another set, they not necessarily they show the same results. It's kind of a heuristics ad hoc developments. So there are a lot of problems preventing its wider use, but it's getting more widely used. And once again, I wouldn't again pit one against the other. Like we don't pit age tech against biomedicine. We try to work them together. So here as well, we need more animal studies. We need more human studies. We need more age silico studies. And for all that, we need more funding.
Great. So Ilya, we've spoken for almost an hour now, and we're near the end of our podcast. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to ask if there's one thing you want the audience and the people listening to take away from today, what would you want that to be?
Yes, I just want them to become more involved, to become more interested in this topic. As we said, there is a epic battle between people who ignore this topic and those who are interested and want to advance it. And I hope the camp of people who want to advance it grows and encompass the whole world. That everybody in the world advances it, not just gets interested and reads, but actually becomes involved. And there are many ways that even not a scientist can become involved as an advocate, as an activist. So I hope that the whole world sees health and longevity as a goal, as they see health as a goal without the longevity component. So that's my main message. Let's get interested. Let's get involved. And thank you for this podcast, which is also part of raising awareness of getting people involved, getting them interested.
No, we love having you here. And I mean, hey guys, listening, if you're listening, this is about like life and death, your life and maybe your death. So it seems really important. And of course, you mentioned a lot of things today, like policy, advocacy, history, everything. I mean, I don't think there's a single base we haven't touched. Maybe economics, but we don't know too much about that, to be honest. But for people who are really interested in your work, where can they go to learn more about it?
You're welcome to visit my website, longevityhistory.com, where I concentrate most of my research. You can find my books there free of charge that you can download. And also, please visit our advocacy organizations, our societies. You can just Google the International Longevity Alliance and the VETIC Association, International Society on Aging and Disease, and also see where you can get involved and fit in. Happy to also contact personally if there's some serious propositions for collaboration.
Great. So for everyone listening, any of the links or things we discussed today will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, Ilia, for coming on to I'm Immortal, your source for all things immortal. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Think great initiatives. Wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.